Welcome to Writer Syndrome, podcast about writing from start to finish. This episode's topic, we're getting into pop culture references. I'm Russ Capasso, and joining me, as always, is Tim Lenné. Tim, how are you?
I'm doing great.
Yeah? That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good. I was trying to think of a good pop culture reference right there.
I got one. My wife.
Oh, Jesus. Good start. Good start.
Thank you. Thank you. So dated.
So dated. Something you want to be cautious of doing when you're making a pop culture reference in your manuscript. So pop culture reference. Well, by the way, I'm glad you're doing well. That's good to hear. I'm so happy. I'm so proud of you. So proud of you. Yeah, happy for you. So pop culture references. This is it was funny because I was poking around being like, I wonder if anyone's written an article about pop culture references in manuscripts, and people have. Unsurprisingly,
totally.
It's not like we
it's
just
a pretty
thought
big
of something
topic, man. Like everybody has strong opinions about.
Yeah.
Although I'll say that most of them tend to be, don't do it.
Yes, that's.
But there are some contrarian articles about in defense of pop culture references. So
don't do it.
I think we'll have
unless it works.
Unless it works, yeah.
I don't know unless I do it and someone reads it and says this works.
I mean, just like with everything, and we can get into it. I think as long as you're being super intentional, with these references.
Where do you want to start with this one? So why don't we start with our own examples? I think in our own books. I don't think we need to define what a pop culture reference is. Hopefully everyone knows.
What is a pop culture reference?
Jesus, I'm not doing that. No. If you don't know, there's another podcast for definitions. Let's talk about our own manuscripts, our own books here. So you definitely have pop culture references yours, but it's fitting because of, I think, the scene setting, timing, and
it's nice of you to say that.
Music.
Yeah, so I have some. So now it's not like a look at me, I know things about pop culture as much as I was hoping it's a tool to kind of to establish the setting, time, and place, because it's a period piece that takes place in the late 70s.
Yep.
I will say that I might lean a little hard into them, but I also think that it works for my characters because they themselves are teenagers who are defining themselves by pop culture and by music and by art. And as kids are wont to do at that age, they're searching for identity, and so I think I hope to use like late 70s pop culture to define them and then have them change through it and kind of shed it. Almost like a skin.
Yep.
But I think that if you don't go on the full ride of my book, it could be groan inducing. But I'm hoping that it's a commentary on my main character about how she's obscuring her own identity through pop culture.
Yeah.
So it was intentional.
Yeah.
And of course, there's a little bit, look at me, I know stuff about punk music in the 70s, but also so with this character.
Right. Which is, that's what it comes back down to. As long as I think if you're genuine to that, then that's what's important. And to get that
and
across.
I think one of my concerns about using pop culture references, my first go round at a book many moons ago, 20-ish years ago, I had pop culture references, but they were pretty contemporary.
Yeah.
Which means it's so easy to date the book in that moment. Yeah. So it will feel passé 2 or 3 years later. So that's what I'm kind of concerned about. Like if you're using contemporary references, in that moment, they could be out of date by the time the book even releases.
Yep.
Small things like going back and reading Stephen King books that talk about Twitter. It's like, well, it's sadly called something else now. And 10 years from now, some kids might be like, what's a Twitter?
Yeah.
And I guess it's like, what's your intentionality for your audience? Is it on the moment? Is this like a pop culture book that's meant to be consumed and disposed of like a chip bag? Yep. Or do you want it to stay?
Yeah.
And I think either's fine. I think you as an author just need to be really, really clear about the impermanence or permanence of your story.
Yep.
How about you? I feel like you didn't have too many. I mean, you certainly have tech though, right?
Yeah.
You have tech references that are timely.
Which I think it's interesting. I think referencing something like that can be dangerous because it definitely puts it in a period of time. Technology is really tough because then you're just kind of like, oh, I know when this took place. Especially in our day and age where things are moving so quickly. But I'm trying to think the really standout pop culture references outside of technology. I definitely make a Soundgarden reference. I think, if I remember correctly, Jake, one of my side characters, is wearing like a Dinosaur Jr. shirt or something like that. I don't know. Like I make like those small things as more of just a kind of like, that was for like building character, and saying like, oh, this is kind of who he is. You get a sense.
Yeah, you're placing them in Gen X. Immediately, you've established that like, they're like what age they are.
Well, that's also a problem though too, because like they're not. That's another thing to think about is like how old is the actual character, and would they actually be wearing this or referencing this? Like they're supposed to be in their late 20s. Like so, I don't know. How many late 20s kids are actually into Dinosaur Jr.? I'm sure a lot are, but like the greater, mass populace maybe isn't and maybe not get that, So it's like, I think it's something to also just be aware of, like making sure like maybe my audience will get that reference, but then like, wait, would the character and at their age in the book actually make that, or you know what I mean? Or do that thing?
A lot of authors use that, like the t-shirts of older bands to kind of give a quick history to, either concerts they've attended or music they listened to in college or high school. Yeah. That's a good question. Yeah.
Because and I think looking at it, it's actually something I gleamed like reading through some of these articles and it made me think like, oh man, my characters are supposed to be all in their late 20s, but I think I think that's okay because I don't overuse it. It's just for like one time, just to kind of give you a sense of who the character is. Like they listen to Dinosaur Jr., but they go to MIT and they're like the super smart person. And so it kind of paints a picture of what they might look like and kind of just, I don't know, and maybe their attitude towards everyone,
and you're safe, right? Because like, even though timeline could be a bit wonky, it certainly establishes the character, and it's an older band. Granted, Jay Mascis, Dinosaur Jr. is still around, but that's not immediately dated. Like I think of like Smash Mouth or Sugar Ray or something.
Sugar Ray. Yeah. And then the only one I make is when they're in the car and they're listening. Like for some reason, I Black Hole Sun came on while I was writing or something. I put that in there. I threw that reference in there because like, oh, this is kind of fitting. It's like, I don't think he's ever said what that song's actually about, but it was like a Black Hole Sun. It sounds like just the end of things, And it's like, as they're driving down, it's like the world is blacking out, I was like, oh, just kind of fitting.
You got some like,
it's on the radio,
foreshadowing there.
It's not like anyone actually put it on. It was just on the radio, which I'm like, that's fitting for anyone just listening to any rock station now. It's like, that's classic rock.
So you sent me an interesting article that I skimmed about use of copyrighted material and lyrics in books.
Yeah, and I want to preface here that neither one of us are lawyers. We don't play any on TVs or like that, so don't listen to us for any legal advice. If you're going to make some type of lyrical reference or anything like that in your book, definitely do your own research. Because yes, there's many things to think about, I think, when you're also making a pop culture reference, especially if it comes to like lyrics, like if you're actually writing them in the book. I think actually using lyrics, it does not fall under fair use. If there's any lawyers out there, which we know plenty of, please reach out. Fair use being like, oh, naming the band, that falls under fair use. Like me saying like Soundgarden or the song title or something like that. There's obviously satire and parody ways you can use, which you've got to be very specific. But I think when you're actually printing lyrics in the book, like that gets a little dicey. And I'm not going to say if I know or not, but like that might be a little dicey. Because you're actually taking copyrighted like material and like putting it in a, you know what I mean? Like lyrics are so. Yeah, I'm gonna stop there because I'm not offering any legal advice. But from my basic knowledge and just thought, I was like, this is cautionary. I would just look into this a little bit more. That's all I'm gonna say.
I will say that I did not do my research and I used. Luckily, it's an unpublished manuscript. But it might be something I need to go back and rethink.
Was it the first page of your book, and that's why you've gotten rejected, maybe?
No, luckily, no. Okay. So I do have like how like books sometimes start with song lyrics or Yeats quotes or whatever.
Stephen King does it a lot. Yeah, I've seen it definitely. Where
so I have that where I have like the dichotomy of like punk and disco. I have like a Dead Boys lyric and a Bee Gees lyric. Yeah. But that has not been part of my manuscript that I've sent out. So I don't think anybody's like, whoa, good luck getting those rights. It's a good question.
Yeah, and getting the okay from the author of those, lyrics and whatnot, or that poem or whatever, and like saying like, hey, can I use this in here? Because like sometimes they don't want those things attached to like a book that's maybe not like Taylor Swift isn't going to want her lyrics attached to some, violent horror thriller probably or whatever, whatever you and I are writing. So
Right.
Or maybe she would. I don't know.
That's so interesting. I just assumed it fell under fair use. Obviously, I don't think it does. And I think I use, and I'll never get the rights to this. I think I use like a few Beatles lyrics. I know I do. I use a few Beatles lyrics like later in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there's ways around it where you can do like kind of paraphrasing where people still get the sense, they get the idea of it, and you can put it in like description of like the character's, view, but not, you know what I mean? That like you can not reword the lyrics, but, get across what the meaning of the lyrics is and being like, oh, this, makes me think of the Beatles song, and then kind of just be like, I was longing for love, or driving in that car while it was your birthday. I don't know. Something,
yeah. So I know we're not lawyers, but in theory, we could say something like, this song came on the radio, but we couldn't say this song came on the radio and then hear the lyrics that played in the car. Not that I would do something that ham-fisted.
I think actually writing it. Yeah, if you're actually writing out the lyrics, then
that's where you're falling into copyright.
You could say you sang along. I think
they sang. Oh, interesting.
You'd say you sang along to it, but I don't know. I don't know if you can actually get into like writing
the actual lyrics of what were sung. Interesting.
Yeah, because those are
honestly, and then even away from the legality of it.
Yeah.
Nobody likes to read lyrics. Nobody likes to really read poems. But they especially like if it's like you're banking on them knowing the song and giving enough. Like even for me, when I come across these things, like if there's poems or song lyrics or whatever in a book, I tend to skim or flip through, right? Because it's just like it's breaking the flow of it.
Yep.
And I think it's one of those like it's one of the pitfalls of being a visual writer who relies on like a camera lens imagination. Like, oh, I would love this song to play in this scene if it was a movie.
Yeah.
Right. Yep. I think you fall too deeply into that where the mediums don't cross in that way. I think it's really easy to isolate your audience if you're just a little too showy with your lyrics or pop culture references in that way.
Yeah. And it can be, and I think we're kind of alluding to this too. I'm getting away from the legal questions because I don't think that's for us. Really.
We are not lawyers.
All I'm warning is like, if you decide to use lyrics in there, do some research. That's all. Like, how much is too much? I guess it depends on the purpose of the references. Like you read Ready Player One. That's just a giant encyclopedia of pop culture references. Like that's the point of the book and the story, right? Like,
right.
Every other page is a pop culture reference. So like, okay, is that too much? Well, no, because that's what the book is designed. Like that's what it's for. That's what it is, right?
Yeah, that's like a lightning in the bottle moment where
100%.
It shouldn't have worked, and it does work.
Yeah,
very well with Ready Player One.
Yeah,
I'll say it does not work with Armada.
No,
it's a very similar approach to this like kitchen sink references. So.
Yeah, like so we read Armada together, didn't we? And I was like, this feels a little too. This feels a little tiring now. It's like, I know all these.
But I feel like Ready Player One just shouldn't have worked. It does. It does. It feels like God. It really shouldn't. Like I would warn against filling your book with 1,000 pop culture references.
Yeah.
And just kind of regurgitating your youth and what was meaningful to you in the 80s. Like it worked. Props to Ernest Clown for making it work, but it shouldn't have.
It shouldn't have, and I think it shouldn't have, and I think there's bringing us back. We're like that's too much, but it worked, and that's its thing, right? That's great. But if you scale it back down for like kind of our references, and we were alluding to before, some of the pros of like using pop culture references are definitely like for character building, saying, like you said, like using a t-shirt or the music they're listening to, or maybe a movie they reference or something like that. And you get a sense of like, who this character is. And I think that's good. Obviously not overdone. Don't do that for every single character, like doing that for like maybe one or two. I picked one because I was like, they're kind of my oddball character, and I kind of want that to, not to listen to Dasher Jr.'s oddball, but you know what I mean? He doesn't fit the place of what's going on.
Well, where he is, yeah.
Yeah. I think it's also good for like kind of world building details too, because then you kind of get a sense of what the characters are thinking of from where they are and the time they're in too, right? Because it sets, on top of that, it sets the reader and kind of grounds them in like a time and place, which like for your book, great example. For mine, it doesn't really put them in a time or place. It just kind of more leads into like character, I think, building than anything else.
I'll tell you, like writing a period piece was mildly exhausting Because all my references, like all my reference points of like things that exist down to certain backpacks and whatever else, like it took a fair amount of research to make sure that things I was referencing actually existed.
Yeah.
At the time.
Yeah. That's a lot.
But I'll say, like, as I'm like planning and beginning to work on the next book, which is contemporary, it's like 2000 XX, like whatever. It's sometime around current year ish.
Yeah. Yep.
I don't have any, like, not that I don't have any, but I'm not reliant on pop culture references to define characters yet. Like, that's not part of the DNA of this piece.
Yep.
Because I want it to be kind of timeless.
Yep.
And that it could scale forward and backwards. And obviously, like, phones and technology, a different conversation, but that's where I'll have a hard time.
Yeah.
But I'm not like, I don't expect to be referencing music or movies. Movies is a tough one because I'm very, very influenced by them. But when you start name dropping stuff, I do think it can be potentially isolating.
Definitely. I think there's also, and from what I know of what you're working on now, and I think there's another thing to think about in general, and something I'm doing for my second book too, is I think I'm also limiting the number of pop culture references, because I think they also they can evoke like a tone or a feeling too. Like my references in the first book are kind of to make it feel playful and a little fun.
Yes.
I think that's an aspect of it where, like, now that's the second book I'm working on it's kind of, I wouldn't say darker, but it's definitely a little more in the thriller genre. There is hitman chasing someone and they're killing people. They're not going to be like, hey, Star Wars, boo, boo, boo. You know what I mean? They're not going to make some reference like that in the middle of, like, while they're in a gunfight or something like that. So it kind of,
because it lowers the stakes all of a sudden, right?
Yeah,
it becomes kind of kitsch.
Yes, I have more fun with the dialogue between characters, and I'm going to use like pop culture references to describe someone or a situation.
Yeah, I think Baby Driver is like a decent example of, that.
Baby Driver, yep.
A lightness in a serious movie.
Yep.
Yeah, it's interesting. But yeah, I'm totally moving away from that. But also, it doesn't fit the tone of this book. I kind of want this to be, dire and scary and serious.
Yeah.
And I wanted the first one to be kind of whimsical and playful and a coming of age type of tale.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's definitely something to think about. And especially if you, one, do you even use them? And then two, if you do, how much? And because you can get away obviously with using them in a serious tone, but you kind of be careful. It might be good to use if you're looking for like a lighthearted moment, but there's so many other ways to like lighten a tone to like bring people down that doesn't need a pop culture reference. Like you can, or even using it in like a simile, which not even the characters are talking about, or the world, it's in the world, like even using it as like a, a narrative descriptor or something. I think even that can set the tone for what a book is, what the reader expectation is going to be. So, and like you said before too, like you got to be careful.
It's also
ones you're choosing, because they set the reader also in a time and a place, which can be outdated very quickly.
And like there's such a risk. Like I think King does it, and we talked about it before. You might have a character in an establishing scene wearing an old band T-shirt that's kind of holy or something, to reference what they might have been like when they were younger, and what type of music they used to like, and also that it's older and whatever, they're tied to the past, or they like this relic or whatever. But if you include that and the character seems very likable, but the reader does not like that band or people who like that band, all of a sudden you've completely lost they're not going to identify with that character as much anymore.
Yeah, recognizing is something to be aware of. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's a roll of the dice.
Yeah. We kind of touched on earlier too, is like, what's your target audience? Like your audience that you're writing the book for, right? Are they gonna get it? And then are they going to recognize it, and are they going to appreciate it? Because you make some reference that maybe if you have a younger reader group and you make some reference that we might get, then they'll be like, what? Like you said, it takes you right out of it.
I think the worst thing you can do is try to use pop culture references to make your characters seem cool. I think that's like just an absolute recipe for failure. Yeah,
make them cool. Don't use some other something to,
because it won't be. It'll feel forced and trite and trying and immediately dated.
Yeah,
like every cool assassin who's drinking vodka straight while sitting alone on his leather couch listening to the Rolling Stones or something, like that's just the setup for those characters.
Yeah, they could just be drinking a glass of water thinking about life. They don't have to be listening.
Be doing something.
Posing. I actually do. I just thought of another one. I make a definitely a Miles Davis reference in Host, but that's like more tied to character and a character's past and what they're remembering.
Is that Keating?
No, that's Lilo.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, because of the hacking.
Yeah, and it's tied to like her like memory of like her father and stuff like this, which may or may not come back.
Yeah.
So, and that was another thing I was reading too, is another use of pop culture references like as Easter eggs versus like a pillar reference. So pillar reference would be basically what we've been talking about, like character description, setting, some character detail, stuff like that. Or an Easter egg that like, oh, you named like the cat Voltron or something like that. It's just like a thing you toss in there as like a whatever, kind of a nod,
There's some character in Percy Jackson. I'm smiling because every time I read it to my kids, I couldn't laugh, and I think her name was like Nancy Boba Fett. And I was like, "Are you kidding me?" Even if it's not intentional, but I'm pretty sure it is.
Come on,
you gotta like not use Nancy Boba Fett.
No,
be like Nancy the Hutt or something,
Nancy the Hutt. That's just so over the top, and that brings us to another point. Be careful of how over the top your references go.
Yeah, it is. It's Nancy Boba Fett.
Oh, that's too much. That's too much.
It's too much.
Too much. Settle down. Another thing I was reading too is a lot of people were leaning on using references that or have already stood the test of time. Using like the Indiana Jones, the Star Wars, the Romeo and Juliet, using these classic older things that have already lasted. And even if you're 18 or 55, 65, you're going to get that reference. You're going to know what it is.
Yeah.
For the most part, most people know who the Beatles are. Most people know what Star Wars is, So that's like another way. If you're going to use them, use something that's a little more blanketed. If you're not sure you have a specific audience and character that makes sense for them to make that reference.
Yeah.
So,
it's interesting, the pop culture references that we end up using, especially for period type pieces or things that folks are using. You're right. It's the stuff that we filtered through and it's stuck around. And there's so much lost music and movies and art that didn't stand the test of time that was wildly consumed at the time. Like,
yes. Yeah.
But if you reference all that, you're not giving anything for the reader to identify with or understand, right?
Yeah. You're kind of
like if it was just all deep cuts, it might as well all be fictional, because if they can't tie themselves to it, or if it's not doing its work as defining a character, then why mention it? Then it's just look at me, I know deep cuts.
Yeah.
I know who television is,
Yeah.
But the one thing that I've tried to avoid a little bit, and I think it's easier with music than movies. I feel like as soon as you start naming movies, it ruins the suspension of disbelief a little bit.
Yeah.
Even when characters are kind of like, this is like, you caught me doing it a few times. This is like a movie. Like, what is this? Night of the Living Dead? Blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, it's like a meta thing almost that kind of pulls you out a little bit, I think.
Yeah, pulls you out of it.
It's
and
dangerous.
As much as you think you're doing a service or you're winking at the audience, I think that wink can completely ruin the spell.
Yeah. And I've caught that in many writers and read a lot of books, and they make a character makes a reference where you're like, I get what you're doing here, but it definitely pulls you out. And I agree, because
and it's a balancing act. Like,
yeah.
I do mention movies by name in my book, but once again, it's for character moments that I'm trying not. Although I do have one. I think I've got one. But when you're dealing with zombie type creatures, it's hard not to reference a zombie movie that was popular at the time. It's just hard not to.
Right. And they're kids, and they would do that.
Yeah.
Because they don't know.
And then, well, you think about something like The Walking Dead.
Yeah.
The Walking Dead is a zombie comic book. It's a zombie series on AMC. What word do they never use? Zombie.
Yeah.
It's never zombies, because zombies is a filmic creation.
Yep.
They're walkers or reekers or whatever. Like they call them every geeks at one point, in the beginning. Yeah. And then I almost think in that situation, call them what they are,
Yeah, just
I think that's okay.
Just
they're zombies. We know they're zombies. They're not doing anything different than I definitely come up with a different name for my zombie type creatures, but they have different rule sets.
Yeah.
They're not undead and they're not zombies.
I never caught that. I actually want to stay away from them thinking it's like Like it's its own real world.
It's its own real world where it seems nobody has ever seen a zombie type movie.
Movies don't exist in this world.
Yeah.
No one's ever made a zombie movie.
Nobody's ever made. Yeah.
That's a little tough. Yeah. So I think like in coming back to make the technology references, like you said earlier, talking about Twitter, and I've thought about this for myself, and it's tough because like you want to be careful of like mentioning like MapQuest, or you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. So because there are those things I think can very quickly date your work. That's been a tough balance, I think, for myself to think about the technology that's involved in the moment and making sure I make it generic enough where clear what kind of time frame this is and time period, but I want someone to read it 10 years from now and just be like, oh, Pixel phones don't exist anymore, or the iPhones no one uses those anymore,
Yeah, and like, this was before implants.
Yeah,
before that, I had my phone in my eye, a literal iPhone.
Yeah, right. So I think those are tough. The technology ones are tough, but
especially now where I think that we are on the cusp of, and I don't want to be hyperbolic, but we are on the cusp of maybe not quite an internet-sized advance in technology, but a big one. Like, yes. I know like there's a lot of tech bro talk about AI, and I know there's a lot of fear and excitement around it.
Yep.
But it's clear that it's going to shake out in certain ways, and maybe it'll just modify certain devices. Maybe we'll just, we'll use it more on our own phones. But it's clear that 10 years from now, our technical interface and the way that we're doing things is going to be substantially different.
Yes.
Than it was 10 years ago.
Yes. I agree. There's no doubt. But if you've written,
and you can't write for that, right? Although, unless you're
doing like a sci-fi thing, and you're like looking 10 minutes into the future here and thinking about what technology might be, and then you kind of come up with that world. Absolutely,
right?
And that's the fun stuff. But I think, and it's tough too because you get it if you're writing for the genre and you're making references to technology in particular. You will get the fans of that really digging into that stuff, and being like, I don't know about that. So it's interesting, and it's also goes for like brands too, like naming brands. I think I name a brand of sneaker in my book. Now I just thought about it, and like, which I don't think that's a big deal, but
I do.
Yeah. Well, what do you mean in terms of time? Oh, I'm sorry. Like naming brands, I think is definitely a big deal in terms of dating it. That's like, there's no doubt about that.
But it's the same type of thing where it's like I chose brands that stood the test of time, that were ubiquitous in the culture at that time, like Chucks or
like you have to be more thoughtful about it,
or Doc Martens or something that was like very, very like once again, like I'm trying to go for like surface level, copy pasta ubiquitous descriptions of the way the kids dress to feel unique, but they all looked the same.
It's interesting
type of thing.
I can't remember. You did use like a lot of brands and like clothing brands, stuff like that, because you kind of did just to set the tone of the world building of like, this is
a
the
little bit
brand.
like I didn't like name jean types, but I certainly named shoe types.
Yeah.
I think at one point I had mentioned like a type of backpack, but that was me getting too into the research, so I did the same thing with like types of helicopters and guns and cars, and I got too into the weeds, and then after the beta, I pulled it back and removed a lot of that research because I was kind of like, look at me, I'm setting a time period, and all these things, like I want to get credit for the work that I did. All these things existed, and here's the detail, but nobody cares.
Yeah.
Like nobody cares, what kind of gun it is or what kind of car it is, unless it's the ones that I kept were reflective of the character.
Yep.
Like Seven's car, the Gremlin, it's used, it's old, it's beaten down, it's loud, but I wasn't, I was just way, way too detailed, I think.
Yeah, that's a line, right? Like how much, showing off too much of your research versus making a balance of like making sure it's just the right amount to get across the character and like the world building. Yeah, so I think that's, I think there's a lot of things, more things, and actually having this conversation is great because there's even more things I'm thinking about making pop culture references I didn't think about before. So that's kind of great. And I think
now I need to go back and edit out the lyrics I used because I don't think Paul McCartney is going to let me use
him, sir.
Paul McCartney.
Sir Paul McCartney. I don't think he's going to be doing that. Oh yeah, Tim. Here you go. You can use it.
There you go.
There you go, Tim. All right.
It's good for the characters.
I understand who they all know. The deeper level. Yeah, I think it's coming back again, and we've said this before, as long as it's in like intentional and reflective of something that's building upon something, a character or a setting, or adding a detail that does that versus, and it's really hard to tell if you're doing that or if you're just putting it, well, if you're just throwing it in there, just throwing it there for the sake of putting it in there, someone's going to read it. Hopefully a beta reader, your editor is going to read it and be like, cut this, But if it's something that's actually building on the character or the world or the setting and adding a detail that kind of grounds the reader and the time and place, like those are the types of things I think you got to think about first before you decide to put one in. So
yeah, I agree. I mean, at its best, it can feel cheap and forced and completely ruin the spell of reading. And its best, it can, build character and honestly give the reader something to anchor to. There is something that's comforting. Reading is, sometimes difficult. And I think that's why sometimes fantasy and sci-fi can be especially difficult because there aren't anchors. It's all new for the most part. That's probably why they end up being so like in genre referential to like Tolkien or Asimov, because they can't use pop culture references whatsoever if you're world building something so new.
Yeah.
Yeah, use them sparingly or not at all.
Our final advice is use them sparingly or not at all.
I mean, I guess like they're a good shorthand, but, and this is really, I'm saying it for myself, objectively, your story shouldn't need them.
Yeah.
It should work without all of them.
That's true. That's true. And I guess there's a, and
I'll say mine doesn't. It could. I think it could.
It definitely can. And it depends if
it's a shorthand.
Yeah. It's also, if you're working on something that's like a time period, or like a dated, like a period piece of something, you kind of have to make them to let people know where they are and when they are. And like, I think you get a little more license to kind of use them a little more frequently. And also, again, it comes back to like the genre you're writing in and the tone you're trying to set, because those can take you out. I've read a couple recent book I read. It was just like a song reference or like some band or something. I was like, kind of took me out. And I was like, what? Why are you doing that? What? This feels a little forced, I think that feels good, right? Pop culture.
Yeah, I feel good about that. I think I've learned a lot today.
I did too, actually, and it's gonna make me think a little bit more about these. What do you read and watch? And speaking of pop culture,
Speaking of pop culture,
what brand of Star Wars or Marvel are you reading, Ralph?
Since we're transitioning to our new section,
yeah,
I did want to bring up one thing because I always think about it when I think of pop culture references.
Yeah,
and then I'll compare it with a movie I've recently seen. Yeah. I always think about the first Shrek. Okay. I walked out of the first Shrek eons ago thinking, I really enjoyed that movie. I thought it was really good and clever. I can't believe they used so many contemporary pop culture references because it's going to feel dated in a week.
Yeah.
And that's where like the Smash Mouth songs came in. It just felt like it was capturing that moment that it was
You're telling
released.
me Smash Mouth isn't timeless?
Well, now I think it means something different. Like when that song or when that movie came out, it was supposed to be cool and the kids were identifying with it. And now it's a commentary and it's kitsch and it's kind of lame and it's quirky.
Yeah.
So Shrek did it at the time, like anybody would use, a popular band with a popular song to sell, records and DVDs and movie tickets.
Yep.
And then I just saw Deadpool versus Wolverine, and I won't spoil anything, but it is.
It's gotta be so. I mean, that's
filled with pop culture references.
Yeah.
But they are like millennial pop culture references, where it's like late 90s, early 2000s.
Okay.
So it's not, look at me, I'm using a contemporary song, isn't this cool? Or look at me, I'm using a Nirvana song. It's like, here's the Backstreet Boys. And, it captures a moment in time when Fox was making these X-Men movies really, really well.
Yeah.
And it's talking directly to that audience and a new audience that can kind of laugh at the other audience about like the kitschness of that time period 20 years ago.
Yeah.
I don't think that Deadpool movie, it comes out intentionally dated and intentionally kind of passé, and it's laughing at itself.
Yes.
And to me, I think that's successful. Like they made a contemporary period piece almost. It's like bringing out something that's not ancient history, but it's 20 years old, and it's kind of laughing at it for everybody to see while respecting it at the same time.
Because they're basically making fun of all the other X-Men movies in that movie, aren't they?
It's oddly,
or Marvel in general. It sounded like, I don't know. I haven't seen it yet. I'm going to try and go see it today.
I'd say go see it because I think it's a nice send off for the Fox movies, and it's kind of sweet.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
Deadpool kind
sweet
of way
and silly. Yeah, I mean it kind of is. It's not just a laugh fest. It's not. It's like there is some tongue in cheek moments, but a lot of the stuff is handled with a certain amount of grace and respect that you wouldn't expect. I wouldn't expect going in.
Yeah.
So it's a better movie. It's weird. I was talking to a friend and I said it's a really great Deadpool movie and it's a good MCU movie.
Yeah, okay.
I think because like I always held the Fox properties to less of a standard.
Yeah.
I liked them for all their sloppy little warts. Like I like those movies a lot.
Yeah.
Whereas I feel like the MCU ones always feel like they're written in a boardroom.
Yes.
With like very, very little character or soul or anything.
Yeah.
But technically they're just proficient. They're like, I don't know, the tastiest advertised cheeseburger that you can eat.
Proficient, efficient, yes.
Yeah.
To get
Whereas Fox is always like that homemade, sloppy, soggy bun.
You're like, it's good. Could use a little something, but it's good.
Use a little something. So anyway, I saw the Deadpools. It was good. And then I'm as far as reading, I'm just finishing up The Silence by Don DeLillo. It's short. It's contemporary. He wrote it in 2020. He's dealing with tech, but like it's kind of about the loss of tech. The silence being like the we don't know why yet, if ever, but all the power's out and devices aren't working. And I think because of that pitch, it kind of it attracted a kind of contemporary audience that isn't looking for literary fiction. They're looking for kind of genre fiction.
Yeah.
And it's not. So I think the folks that were looking for genre are like, this sucks. But I went in looking for literary and I love Don DeLillo. So I'm like, this is great. And it's sparse and it's intentional. And like every sentence is crafted. But for those looking for like, a day the world stood still type of like apocalyptic, how do humans adapt? That's not this book. This is like, read sparse sentences over and over again and get a deeper meaning from them as opposed to like, how are they going to survive this one?
Yeah.
So the reviews are kind of like, this is garbage. It's pretentious. I was reading it on Amazon and I was like, wow, like I couldn't feel any differently than these reviews because I think it's a great book.
How was it marketed? Was it marketed as like a genre or like how was it set up to be that? And that's why people are disappointed?
Maybe. I mean, just the whole pitch and the cover, it's a persuasive pitch. Like it's something people want to read on the beach. Like, hey, like what would happen? And this doesn't care. This is kind of like more like how are people adapting and still receiving cultural signals? It's interesting. People are often talking to themselves and like regurgitating old information. It happens on like the day of the Super Bowl. Some guy just kind of keeps staring at the TV screen, even though nothing's playing. And he's just like cheering and like self-commentating what's happening. Like the signals are still being broadcast in this way in his brain. Really cool. But if you want to know if they're going to stockpile food and create Walking Dead type communities, it's the wrong book.
It's interesting. That for some reason that made me think of when you remember that movie Drive, that movie came out and it was like marketed as like a Fast and Furious. Everyone thought it was gonna be a Fast and Furious movie. It was not Fast and Furious, and people were.
I love Drive. Yeah.
Oh, it's a great movie. People were pissed. They were like, I thought it was gonna be Fast and Furious. Like, no.
They're like, why is Ryan Gosling still standing in an elevator in slow motion, looking at dust?
What a great movie. Anything else?
I started on my runs because I finished Millennial People, which I loved the first 2 acts of. Yeah. But it had not a very satisfying third act. Ballard, doing all of his Ballardness literary fiction things. And then I started listening to Amityville Horror.
Okay.
Since I didn't want to because it's not fiction. I mean, it's fiction, but it's, pitched as, not fiction.
Yeah.
But just to kill time on my long runs, I've been listening to it. So it's not good. It's like manipulative baloney, but it's one of those like tent poles in the genre that you kind of need to. I think I need to do my research a little bit. Like
bologna itself, the manipulative meat, lunch meat.
Yes, yes.
It's trying to be cool with all the other Italian meats. Like, get out of here, bologna. Get out of here.
Get out of here. Get out of here.
Things are bologna.
How about you? What are you reading? What are you watching?
Not too much. So I finished that. I think last time I was almost close to finishing Along Came a Spider by James Patterson, which is kind of like a little crime thriller kick, which is good. Started A Dream of Stewards by Johann Martin. It's like a time traveling thriller. I was just kind of in the mood for some time travel books, as I'm thinking of my own time travel book recently.
Oh, yeah.
It's good. I'm enjoying it. I'm like probably halfway through. This is a weird one. So I found this author, and I think I'm going to try and reach out to him to see if he wants to come on to our cute little tiny podcast we have here. It's funny. I found him.
Cozy. It's our cozy podcast.
Yes. I guess we're remarketing as a cozy podcast.
Remarketing as a cozy podcast.
So I came across him randomly because when I went down to go see the Green Bank Observatory in West Virginia, and went down to Richmond, and I was trying to I want to do this breweries and books tour type thing where I find authors in the local area, and like we just go to a brewery, and like instead of doing like the usual book tour, like a bookstore, go somewhere where
nice.
Something a little different. So I was like trying to set that up, and I just didn't get the time to do it. But I was looking around for authors who were down in Virginia. I don't know how I came across him. I must have just done like authors of Virginia, and somehow I came across him. And I found his book, and I was like, "Oh, cool! Time traveler thriller. That sounds right up my alley." And I saw his website and everything else, and I said, I should reach out to him. Never got a chance to, but then I picked up his book and I started reading it. And he's kind of like, seems like he's a little bit further along than us. He's working on his second, third book. He's got a series he's working on here.
Nice.
So I picked up his book. I was like, oh, this is fun. So I was going to try and reach out to him, see if he wants to hop on
That's awesome, dude.
The old cozy cast here. So I started that, and that's it for reading. Watching, I finished The Acolyte.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Should I watch it? Should I resubscribe to Disney Plus?
No.
Okay.
No, don't resubscribe to Disney Plus for it. No.
I watched the first couple episodes at a friend's house, and I was like, okay.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. It was like a martial arts kind of thing. That kind of dies down and becomes like a murder mystery thing, and then it comes back to martial arts. There's some cool aspects to it, but it was like,
no way.
If you get wrapped up in it, finish it. It's not bad. It ain't great. Which I feel like is like the review for like every show that's like out now. It's like,
Yeah.
You could do some laundry.
Isn't it a little sad that Star Wars has become,
Yeah, they got to pump out that content to keep
like the frozen yogurt of desserts now. It's like, it's like cold and kind of sweet, but it's not great, but I'll eat it.
Yeah. That's what Star Wars has become. The frozen yogurt of
sci-fi.
So,
Who wants to go out for frozen yogurt?
Yeah.
I guess I can.
I guess I don't know. Do I have to put clothes
maybe
on?
A matinee? I don't know.
I have to get on my PJs for this.
Can I stream it?
And then I'm going to say this, but I don't want us to go on too long of a rant about it because, like, we got to keep this podcast short. But I really haven't been watching anything. Actually, I might go see Deadpool Wolverine today.
I give that a huge stamp of like, go see it. I thought it was a really fun time in the theater.
If it's got the Tim Letney stamp of approval, then I'm going for it.
But also, I love Fox's X-Men, and I really enjoyed the first two Deadpool movies. So if you enjoyed those movies, you will enjoy this movie.
All right, perfect. That's what I need. But what I did watch, not any of those movies. I rewatched the original Evil Dead.
Did you just say we can't go on a rant and you brought up Evil Dead in the last minute of this cozy podcast?
That's why I had to preference it. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you. That's our episode. This episode will go on for another 45 minutes at least. That's why.
You can't bring up the chin. You can't bring up the Oldsmobile.
I haven't seen that in so long. And I watched it with someone who had never seen it. And they were like, that movie is awesome. And I said, wait till we watch 2 and wait till we watch the rest of them. I think they're just fun. Because I want to watch them all the way through again. Because I haven't seen the Evil Dead Rising or whatever it is, Rise Up. And I haven't seen the Evil Dead by Fede Alvarez yet, which I heard was like a straight horror movie. And I heard it was good. So I was like,
Fede actually quite good. Yeah.
So I kind of want to see, I was like, I want to go through all of them. But man, that first one, what a great movie.
I mean, I'll tell you, like that movie was.
I'm putting you on a timer right now. So.
Okay. Here. I'll say that it's such an inspirational movie. It's what I always wanted to be able to have the funds and time to do, just to go with friends and
into
have a vision and try to make a shoestring budget horror movie. Like that's like a bucket list type item. Yep. I love the creative camera shots. I love how they did it. Like the fact that they got like a sawhorse and like Vaselined it up to get the camera zooms. Like there's so many creative, low budget, fun things that that movie just holds such a special place in my heart.
Yeah.
And honestly, such an identity for me when I was like in my late teens and early 20s.
Yeah.
It's something that I kind of grew through and grew past, but there's a part of me that just has a really big love for, especially the first movie.
Yeah. It's fun.
And then having I was able to interview Bruce Campbell when I was a bit younger, and he was, very nice and gracious. And
that's awesome.
But yeah. And then one last thing, I will say that talking about pop culture references, bringing it back.
Yeah.
I do have, not by name, but an Evil Dead reference in my book.
Did I miss it?
It's just tonally one scene is Evil Dead 2, I guess.
Okay.
But I didn't, obviously Evil Dead came out after this book takes place, but there is like kind of a slapsticky setup that's Evil Dead 2.
Okay. I'm thinking,
and that was like my subtle nod to that movie and those movies.
I love it. So
did
that's
I do
it.
it? I'm sorry. Did I ramble
No, that's
much?
good. No, you're clocked. You're clocked in good. I won't even cut it. I'll leave that all in for the.
Let me know. Let's talk about Evil Dead 2 next time.
Yeah, I will. So that's it. That's our episode. What are we doing here? Thanks for listening. First of all, our next episode we're gonna get into book titles. So I came up with some titles for my new books, and I think book titles are fun. And I sometimes kind of wish I titled my first book differently, but I'm happy.
Really? I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, we can talk about that next time. So if you enjoyed these episodes and you know someone else that might, share it along with them. We're on Instagram at Writer Syndrome Books. You can find all these episodes. Reach out to us if you're an author or someone wants to talk about books or writing. Get all that information at writersyndrome.com.